So as promised, here's a little discussion on switches and scanning, which are really foundational pieces of equipment when we talk about assistive technology. So think of a switch this way, right? You use switches in your daily environment all the time. You turn on and off lights. It's a switch, right? And we call it a switch. Why? Because it activates energy or it interrupts energy. Okay? When you use your remote control on your TV to move channel up or channel down, it's a switch. It's more of a complex switch. You have lots of switches built into that, and then you have a relay system that's usually built around infrared. Okay, so you use switches in your daily life even though you might not think about it. Your indicator signal in your car, when you turn that on, you click it down, it activates a switch, creates a bridge for energy to flow, and you're giving communication. That's probably the best example of how we use it within assistive technology services. All right, so here are the different types of switches. So the idea is the individual pushes the switch to get a reaction or communicate something. So the activation can be through movement, right? Physically touching, hitting the switch. It can be mechanical, so they push it down, and then there's two pieces of metal that make contact usually, and that creates the bridge electrically. They can be electric in terms of activation. So electrodes, just like one would see in a laboratory, attached by a gel interface onto your skin. So a muscle twitch can activate the actual electrode, and then we signal something because that's caused the bridge electronically. It can be electromagnetic, so for instance the example of your infrared remote. It can be proximity, so body heat can also cause it, or galvanic skin response, how sweaty one's palms are. We can also activate switches through respiration. So we can have a puff of air through a tube, and then we have a device that measures air pressure, and that activates the switch to start something or stop something. We can also, instead of puffing, we can suck the tube like a straw, and that will also cause the imbalance of air pressure and stop the switch. We can also have ones that are built around phonation, that are built around sound, so the switch will activate if a student makes a noise, and also stop if they make the same kind of noise. If it's loud enough and if our sensitivity on the switch is sufficient. Operation. Switches can operate momentarily, so as long as our hands press down on the button, it will operate the switch. They can be latched, so you click on the button once, and it'll keep going until you click on it again, and it'll turn it off. It can also be a time switch, so you press on the button, and then after a certain set amount of time, 5 seconds, the switch will turn off. Many different types of switches out there. We have paddle switches that can work on body movement, shifting in one's chair. Wobble switches that work with auditory feedback. Leaf, which are two-way body movement, so you have kind of a hinge system where there's two switches, one on each side of the paddle or the board. It's that top picture right here. Level, they're like wobble except they only move in one direction, so imagine something that presses down kind of like a sewing machine pedal. Pneumatic, so they work on sips and puffs. So down here with the football and the frog, you see a tube here, right? And so you squeeze that frog, and there's going to be a different air pressure that's picked up in the little switch here. Then of course we also have pillow switches. So these are soft, can go underneath one's leg or underneath an arm to activate through movement. There's an electrode still inside, so you still need to press down on those. Scanning formats. Okay, so if we have a student with, you know, very little mobility and or spasticity, like cerebral palsy, we can use scanning formats for that student. So we can have a selection of items. So imagine that we have different foods lined up, okay? And we ask the student, what do you want to eat for lunch? So then each of those items gets highlighted, and then the student hopefully presses on the switch or makes a sound to activate the switch when it gets the item that's highlighted. So that would be a linear format because it's working in a line of selection. So if we're drilling them in mathematics and we have number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 all in a line, and we ask what's 2 plus 2, when it highlights 4, we get to 4 and it highlights, then the student presses the switch and activates that selection, and then we know that that's their selection and that we can give them feedback at that point. We can also use scanning manually, so the teacher could point to each of those selections, and the student, if they can give a response, you know, that we accept as yes or no, you know, they can, when you get to that selection that you're pointing at, that can be the case, that it's given through auditory feedback or vocal feedback. We also have rotary scanning formats, so something like the face of a clock, of which a dial turns around, and once it gets to the selection, the switch is activated. Group items, so we can have groups, so food, beverage, etc. When it highlights it and the student presses the switch, then we start to have a different selection of items. You'll see these in many electronic devices, so you have a kind of a genre of, or a category. The student can press on the category and then they press on whatever items are in that category. It can also work in a row column format. You select an item from the row, and then beneath that is a column of items within the category that the student can select from. Scanning techniques, they can be automatic. So for instance, if we talked about the rotary clock, right, it goes until the switch hits. The dial keeps turning around until the student hits the switch, and then it stops. If it's step, you hit the switch, you keep it pressed down, right, to move to the selection and then release. Inverse, you hit the switch, and after a certain default amount of time, a selection's made. So that one kind of is like a hovering technique.